The sun was rising slowly over the wide open land, painting the sky with shades of yellow and orange. Soft morning mist covered the grass like a gentle blanket. In the middle of this peaceful place lived a rancher named Thomas Reed. He was a quiet man in his early 30s, strong from years of work, with sun-tanned skin and a kind heart. Thomas lived alone on his ranch, far from town, surrounded only by cattle, horses, and the endless plains. Thomas enjoyed the quiet life, but sometimes the silence felt too heavy. He would speak to his horses just to hear a voice. He dreamed about having company at the ranch, someone to help with work, someone to laugh with, someone to talk to during long nights. But he rarely met new people, and he was known to be shy around strangers. That morning, Thomas saddled up his horse to check the fences and water supply for the cattle. The air smelled fresh after a night of light rain. Birds were singing from the tall trees near the creek. Everything looked normal. But then, something unusual caught his eye. Far out near the edge of his land, close to a cluster of bushes, he spotted something dark lying on the ground. At first, he thought it might be a fallen animal. But as he rode closer, his heart began to beat faster. It did not look like an animal at all. It looked like a person. He stopped his horse several feet away, uncertain and cautious. Living on the frontier, one learned to be careful. Many stories were told in town about disagreements between settlers and local tribes. Some ranchers and farmers lived in fear, worried about misunderstandings turning into trouble. Thomas never felt that way. He believed all people deserved respect, but he also understood he needed to be careful. Slowly, he stepped down from his horse and moved closer. The person was lying curled on the ground, breathing softly, but not moving much. Thomas knelt beside him and realized it was a native tribal leader. Judging by his clothing and the necklaces he wore, the tribal man looked injured and weak. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, and his body cold from the damp ground. Thomas looked around, wondering what had happened. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks from horses or men. Perhaps the leader had been out hunting or traveling and got hurt by accident. Perhaps he had been trying to return to his people but collapsed. Thomas knew the right thing to do. He could not leave the man there. He gently touched the stranger's shoulder. "Sir, can you hear me?" he said softly. There was a quiet groan, a sign of life. Thomas felt relief but also a new worry. If the tribe came looking for their leader and found him here, would they think Thomas had harmed him? He swallowed his fear and reminded himself of who he was. A person in need should never be left alone. That is what his father had taught him. He carefully helped the man sit up and then assisted him onto the horse. It was not easy, but Thomas was strong and determined. He guided the horse slowly back to his home, keeping one arm ready to steady the injured man. Inside the small wooden house, Thomas laid the leader on his own bed. He quickly fetched warm water, clean cloths, and simple medicines from his cabinet. He carefully washed dirt from the man's arms and face. The leader's skin felt cold, so Thomas placed extra blankets around him. Hours passed. The stranger remained quiet, drifting between sleep and short moments of awareness. Thomas tried to communicate, offering water and soft bread. The leader drank a little, showing a spark of strength. As the day went on, Thomas checked outside often, expecting to see tribal riders approaching. He imagined how they might react: worried, angry, protective. He did not blame them. He would feel the same if someone from his community disappeared. Each time he stepped outside, the wind rustled the tall grass, and his heart raced, but no one came. By afternoon, he sat in a chair near the bed, watching over his guest like a guardian. He wondered who this man was. Maybe a respected elder among his people. Maybe a wise guide. Thomas admired the peaceful expression on the man's face even while hurt. He carried dignity. He spoke softly, even though he did not know if the leader understood English. "You are safe here. I hope you can feel that," he said. His voice was gentle, filled with honest care. Slowly, the leader's eyes opened. They were dark and deep, holding both strength and confusion. He looked around the room, then at Thomas. For a moment, fear flashed in his eyes, a natural reaction in unfamiliar surroundings. But Thomas smiled kindly, placing his hand over his own heart to show goodwill. The leader watched him quietly, breathing more steadily now. He tried to sit up, but Thomas gently guided him to rest. "Please, stay still. You are hurt. You need to recover." There was silence between them, not uncomfortable, just quiet understanding. The leader seemed to recognize that Thomas was helping, not harming. He nodded slowly, trusting the man beside him. Night arrived. The sky outside turned dark, and the sounds of nighttime animals filled the air. Thomas lit a lamp and stayed awake, listening carefully. The leader slept more peacefully now, his breathing stronger. Thomas made himself a small meal and ate it quietly at the table. He kept thinking, what will happen tomorrow? Will the tribe come looking? What if they misunderstand and think I captured their leader? What if they storm the ranch? Worry twisted in his stomach. But then he looked toward the bed and saw the man resting safely. That sight reminded him of his choice. He did the right thing. Fear should never stop kindness. Before trying to sleep, Thomas made sure the door was unlocked. If the tribe came, he wanted them to see he was not hiding anything. He left the lamp burning low, a signal of welcome, not danger. He lay on a small cot near the bed, too concerned to sleep deeply. All through the night, he woke up now and then, checking on the tribal leader. Each time he saw the man breathing gently, he felt relief. Hours passed until the first light of dawn touched the windows. Birds began singing again. The world woke slowly, and so did Thomas. He stretched his tired body and looked toward the bed. The tribal leader was already awake, watching him, calm and alert. Their eyes met. This time, the leader offered a small nod, a silent, "Thank you." Thomas smiled back. The fear he had felt earlier now seemed smaller. Something good had begun a bridge between two very different lives. But Thomas did not know what would come next. He did not know that by choosing to help a stranger, his life was about to change forever. He thought he was just doing a simple act of kindness. He had no idea that this act would bring something extraordinary, something beyond his deepest imagination to his quiet ranch. For now, all he knew was that he had saved a man who needed help. And in his heart, he felt calm for the first time in a long while. The sun climbed higher, warming the land, signaling a new day, a day full of unknown possibilities. Thomas took a deep breath and stood up, ready to face whatever would happen next. He had no idea that soon, very soon, he would receive a surprise that would completely transform his lonely life, a surprise that would arrive not in anger or danger, but as a gift of friendship and unity. The early morning sun filled the small wooden house with a warm, gentle light. Thomas rubbed his tired eyes and stretched. He had not slept well, but he felt a quiet hopefulness inside him. The tribal leader was awake now, sitting up slightly against the pillows Thomas had placed behind him. Thomas smiled politely. "Good morning," he said softly, even though he wasn't sure the man could understand his words. Still, kindness didn't always need the same language. The leader watched Thomas closely, as if trying to study his face. His eyes were soft but alert, full of wisdom. He lifted a hand slightly, pointing toward the cup on the small table nearby. Thomas understood and rushed to help, offering the leader a drink of water. The leader drank slowly, then nodded once, a clear sign of gratitude. Thomas felt his heart relax. "I'm glad you're feeling a little better," he said. There was silence again, but this silence felt peaceful. Two men from two very different worlds sitting together, sharing a moment that felt simple and important at the same time. After checking on his guest once more, Thomas stepped outside. The air was cool, and the morning breeze danced through the tall grass of the open plains. His cattle were grazing calmly. Everything looked normal, but inside his mind, many thoughts were moving quickly. He wondered if the tribe had noticed the leader missing yet. He wondered if they were already searching these lands. He knew they must care deeply for him. A person so respected would not be forgotten for long. Thomas walked toward his barn to get breakfast for his horse. But suddenly, he stopped. The peaceful morning changed in an instant. In the distance, he saw something moving, several figures riding on horseback, coming fast across the open field. Their silhouettes grew clearer with each second. Tribal riders. Thomas's heart began to pound. He took a deep breath and looked back toward the house. He whispered to himself, "Stay calm. You did the right thing. There is nothing to hide." But fear still touched his heart. He did not fear them as enemies, he feared misunderstanding. Words could not easily explain what had happened. One wrong assumption could turn peaceful intentions into trouble. The riders came closer, stopping a short distance from the ranch. There were 4 of them, strong, proud, and protective. Thomas carefully lifted both his hands to show he held no weapon. He wanted to show peace, not threat. One of the riders stepped forward. His expression was serious and full of worry. He spoke in his own language, the words, fast and urgent. Thomas could not understand, but he recognized one thing: they were asking about their leader. Thomas nodded quickly and pointed toward the house. "He's inside. He is safe." The riders looked at each other. Their eyes showed doubt. They did not move. They seemed unsure whether to trust him. Thomas placed his hand over his heart, just like he did to the leader earlier. He hoped the gesture would show truth. His eyes pleaded for them to believe him. After a tense moment, the first rider slowly dismounted his horse. Cautiously, he walked with Thomas toward the house. The other riders waited outside. Watching every move carefully, Thomas opened the door gently. The leader inside turned his head, and when he saw the tribal rider at the door, his eyes brightened with relief. The rider rushed to his side, speaking softly and comfortingly. The leader raised his hand weakly toward Thomas, as though telling the rider not to worry, that Thomas had been a friend. The rider looked at Thomas again, this time with respect instead of suspicion. More riders came inside one by one. They gathered around their leader, checking his condition with gentle care. Thomas stepped back to give them space. He felt grateful that everything remained calm. The leader spoke to his people in a low but strong voice. His words carried message and meaning. The riders listened closely. And then they looked toward Thomas with eyes filled, not with fear but with appreciation. One of the riders bowed his head slightly, showing honor. Thomas felt a lightness inside him, as if warm air filled his chest. He nodded back in respect. The group stayed for a little while longer. They offered the leader water and reassurance. They touched his shoulder, reminding him he was safe among his own again, and because of Thomas, he was alive. Soon it became clear they planned to return him to their village. The riders carefully helped the leader sit up. Thomas went outside and prepared his strongest horse, the one with a smooth gait, so the journey would be easier. He brought a thick blanket to wrap around the leader, protecting him from wind and cold. When they were ready to leave, something surprising happened. The leader reached out and took Thomas's hand gently. His eyes said everything his voice could not: words of gratitude, words of friendship, words of connection beyond language. Thomas felt warmth rise through him. He nodded slowly, hoping the leader understood he was welcome any time. The riders placed the leader securely on the horse and began their slow return toward the horizon. Thomas stood there, watching them disappear into the distance, silhouettes fading into golden sunlight. As calmness returned to the ranch, Thomas walked back into his home. His heart felt full. He had faced fear and uncertainty, but he had chosen kindness, and it had brought peace. Still, as the day continued, Thomas could not stop thinking. What would happen next? Would he ever see the leader again? Would this new bond between them continue? Or would it end like a dream at sunrise? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his cattle calling and the normal chores of ranch life. He worked all morning, checking fences, feeding animals, and cleaning the barn. He tried to keep busy, but his mind kept drifting back to the events of the morning. By midday, he sat down for a simple lunch at his wooden table. The quiet returned, the familiar quiet of living alone. But today, it felt different. The silence did not feel heavy. Instead, It felt full of promise. That afternoon, long after the riders had gone, Thomas stepped outside again. He watched the clouds drift lazily across the sky. The breeze carried the faint smell of wildflowers. A gentle feeling of peace wrapped around him. The sun was lowering when Thomas finally decided to rest on his porch. He rocked back and forth in his old wooden chair. He replayed the events again, in his mind the discovery of the injured leader, the care he provided, the arrival of the tribe, the peaceful departure. He smiled a little, thinking, maybe something good will come from this. Maybe I won't be so alone anymore. The day slowly turned into evening. Colors in the sky shifted from gold to pink and then to soft purple. The stars began to appear, one by one. Thomas stood up to head inside, but then something unexpected caught his attention. Far away, near the same open field where everything began, a group of figures were approaching again. They moved slowly this time. Not in urgency, like the morning riders. They rode calmly, like people on a peaceful mission. His heartbeat quickened not with fear, but with curiosity. As they came closer, he realized they were from the same tribe. But this time, they were not warriors. They were women, 5 of them dressed in traditional clothing, each carrying different baskets and supplies. They stopped a few steps from his porch. One of them stepped forward and spoke in a friendly, respectful tone. Thomas could not understand the language, but the kind expression on her face spoke clearly they were here with good intentions. Another woman stepped forward and presented a beautifully woven blanket decorated with symbols from their culture. She offered it with both hands and a gentle bow. Thomas accepted the blanket carefully, unsure what to say, unsure what this moment meant. Then he remembered the rider's expression from earlier, the look of gratitude, the bow, the respect. The leader had been thankful, deeply thankful. And this was a continuation of that gratitude. Thomas looked at the 5 women standing together calmly, with gentle smiles and kind eyes. They were here as a message, a gesture of friendship and support. They were here to help him, to honor the bond he had created through compassion. Thomas felt overwhelmed, but in a good way. The loneliness he had lived with for years suddenly felt like a distant memory. His quiet ranch was no longer empty, it was now a place where 2 worlds were beginning to connect. The sky above twinkled with evening stars, as if celebrating the new beginning. Thomas stood there silently, realizing his act of care had not only saved a life, it had opened a door to something extraordinary. The evening breeze was gentle as Thomas stood in front of his porch, unsure of what to do next. The 5 women from the tribe waited patiently, each carrying something meaningful. Their calm smiles showed that they were not here for trouble. They were here with purpose. Thomas placed his hand over his heart, the way he had learned to show respect. The women nodded, pleased by his gesture. The eldest among them stepped forward. She held a small bowl filled with herbs and wrapped leaves. She said a few words in her language, her tone soothing, like a soft song carried by the wind. Thomas could not understand the words, but the meaning felt clear. They were offering help. They were showing friendship. He stepped aside and gently waved them in, welcoming them into his house. Inside, the women looked around with interest. His home was clean but simple. A wooden bed, a table, chairs he had built himself, and shelves holding a few books and tools. The youngest woman's eyes widened with curiosity, especially when she saw the sewing machine Thomas rarely used. One woman carefully placed her basket on the table and began taking out fresh fruits and bread. Another started tidying the space without being asked, folding blankets neatly. The elder checked the fire in the stove and added wood, warming the house. Thomas watched in amazement. His home had never felt so lively before. Their presence filled the silence, not with noise, but with warmth, with life. He touched the woven blanket they had given him, running his fingers over the detailed patterns. It was soft and beautifully made with bright colors and symbols he didn't recognize. He wondered if each design had a special meaning. The eldest woman noticed and approached him. She pointed at the symbols and spoke gently. He didn't know the words, but he understood she was explaining. Her finger traced a sun shape, perhaps representing gratitude or a blessing for his home. She smiled, and Thomas smiled too. Though they could not speak the same language, they communicated with gestures, expressions, and kindness. That was enough. As night came, the women prepared a meal. They cooked with skill, using vegetables and herbs Thomas had never tried before. The smell was wonderful, warm, and comforting. Thomas helped by setting the table and offering fresh water. When dinner was ready, they all sat together. It was a simple meal, yet it felt like a feast to Thomas. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten with company, the sound of soft laughter, the comfort of being surrounded by others. The women spoke quietly to one another while Thomas listened, curious about their stories. He noticed the way they cared for each other, a community strong and united. After the meal, the eldest woman brought out the small bowl of herbs again. She pointed at the door and then at the sky, asking if she could step outside. Thomas nodded. They walked out into the open land. Night stars shined brightly, and the moon cast a silver glow on the grass. The woman knelt down, placed a pinch of herbs onto the soil, and whispered a prayer of gratitude, a prayer for peace. She placed her hand against the earth, showing deep respect for the land that supported them all. Thomas stood quietly, feeling the moment touch his heart. He realized how connected the tribe was to the land, how much they valued nature, community, and harmony. When they went back inside, the women prepared places to sleep. They chose a soft area near the fireplace, while Thomas took his usual small cot. Before resting, the eldest woman looked at him with a kind and respectful nod. It was how she said goodnight. Thomas lay awake for a little while, staring at the ceiling. He could hear quiet breathing from the women and the crackling sound of the fire. His house no longer felt lonely. It felt like a home shared with friends. He smiled to himself. Life had changed so quickly. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but he was no longer worried. He felt safe and blessed. When morning came, Thomas woke up to the sound of soft voices and the aroma of breakfast cooking. The women were already busy preparing food, cleaning, organizing the house. They moved gracefully, helping one another, without needing to speak. Thomas stepped outside to feed the horses and check the cattle. The sun shone bright, and the air felt fresh. As he worked, he noticed the 5 women watching him from the porch. They seemed interested in learning about ranch life. One of them stepped forward with confidence and pointed toward a rope hanging on the fence. Then she made a circular motion with her hand, as if asking if she could help. Thomas nodded happily. He showed them how to guide horses gently, how to carry water buckets, how to mend small parts of the fence. They observed carefully. Learning each step, they worked together, turning the chores into something enjoyable. While Thomas repaired a fence post, one of the women handed him tools before he even asked. Another brought him cool water when the sun grew hot. They acted like a team he had never imagined having. By afternoon, the ranch looked cleaner and more organized than ever. Thomas felt proud not just of the work they did, but of the friendship growing among them. He took them inside and showed them his small collection of books. The younger ones pointed at the pictures with excitement. Thomas laughed. He loved seeing their curiosity. Later, the eldest woman signaled to him to sit. She opened her basket and took out small pieces of carved wood. She arranged them on the table, the shapes of animals and plants from nature. Thomas watched as she placed a small carved horse in his hand. She pointed at his real horses outside and smiled. It was a gift, a respectful symbol of connection between their worlds. Thomas held the carving gently. He felt grateful. He pointed toward his chest, then toward the carving, then toward the woman. It was his way of saying, "Thank you. This means a lot." The woman understood. Her eyes softened with kindness. Days passed like this, peaceful, busy, full of learning and sharing. The women taught Thomas how to prepare herbal remedies, how to fix clothing, and how to create strong ropes from plant fibers. In return, Thomas taught them ranch skills and simple English words like water, food, horse, and friend. Every evening, they shared meals together. Sometimes they would sit around the fire, and the women would sing soft songs from their tribe. Words Thomas didn't know, but music he loved. Thomas felt joy in these simple, beautiful moments. The quiet loneliness that had once ruled his life disappeared completely. One evening, when the sky was glowing orange from the sunset, Thomas sat on the porch while the women sorted herbs nearby. He looked at the wide land around him, the peaceful scene, and the friends who now lived with him. He realized something important: helping the tribal leader had brought meaning into his life. His ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a place where friendship and respect grew stronger every day. As he sat there thinking, he heard a familiar sound: distant hooves approaching. Riders again. Thomas stood up quickly, not with fear, but curiosity. The women stood too, watching the horizon. Slowly, the tribal riders came into view. They moved calmly, with purpose. When they reached the ranch, they dismounted and greeted the women warmly. Then one rider stepped forward and handed Thomas a small pouch decorated with beads. Thomas opened it carefully. Inside was a beautifully carved medallion, a symbol of honor from the tribe. The rider placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder and spoke with deep emotion. Thomas still did not understand the words, but the message was clear: respect, gratitude, friendship. Thomas bowed his head, touched by the gesture. The rider then looked toward the 5 women and spoke. The women nodded gently. They were staying not as gifts or property but as friends of the ranch, helpers in this new bond between 2 different worlds. Thomas felt humbled. He looked at the women, their smiles warm and welcoming, and he realized something extraordinary. He wasn't alone anymore. The sky darkened, stars appearing like jewels above. The riders left peacefully, leaving behind a ranch changed forever. Thomas looked at the women, and they smiled back. They were not just visitors, they were now part of his life, part of the land, part of his heart. This new friendship was only the beginning of a long journey, a journey that would shape their futures in ways none of them could yet imagine. Days, then weeks, passed peacefully on the ranch. The 5 women became an important part of Thomas's everyday life. Their friendly presence filled his home with laughter, warmth, and care, things he had not experienced in a long time. Each morning, Thomas woke up to the cheerful sounds of movement in the kitchen, the crackling of firewood, and soft voices speaking in the tribe's language. Breakfast was always ready: warm bread, fresh fruits, and sometimes special meals they prepared using herbs from the land. Thomas would smile and thank them, sometimes using simple words they had taught him. They laughed happily whenever he spoke in their language, gently correcting his pronunciation. After breakfast, they worked together. The women helped take care of the cattle, fed the horses, gathered fruits, and collected water. They braided ropes from tough grasses, stitched stronger bags, and decorated blankets with beautiful patterns. Thomas often stopped working just to admire their skill. They were artists in everything they touched. In return, he taught them how to ride horses more confidently, how to fix the water pump near the barn, and how to repair fences. They learned quickly, turning chores into moments of teamwork and fun. Sometimes, in the afternoon, they would all rest under the shade of a tall tree. The women would tell stories using gestures and drawings in the dirt. Thomas listened with interest, imagining the heroes and legends of their tribe. Other times, Thomas shared stories about ranch life, his parents, his dreams, his lonely nights before they arrived. He tried to explain in simple English, and though they didn't understand every word, they understood his heart. A strong bond formed between them, a bond that needed no shared language to be understood. As their friendship grew deeper, Thomas began to see changes in himself. He was happier, he worked harder, but enjoyed the work more. Nights were no longer silent. The women often sang sweet songs. Their voices lifted into the night sky like music carried by the stars. He realized that kindness had brought him more than he ever expected. One afternoon, Thomas rode out to check the cattle along the northern fields. 2 women joined him, riding horses gracefully. They laughed when Thomas taught them how to whistle to call the cattle. The horses trotted joyfully under the clear blue sky. Suddenly, Thomas noticed something unusual: broken fence posts near a dry riverbed. Hoofprints in the dirt showed where some cattle had wandered off. The women looked at Thomas with concern. Using hand signals, they asked what they could do. Thomas pointed to the tracks. and together, they followed the trail. After a short ride, they found the missing cattle near a grove of trees. Some were stuck in thick brush, unable to move freely. Without fear, the women climbed down and helped guide the animals back to safety. They worked patiently, speaking calming words to the cattle. With teamwork, every animal was returned safely. Thomas looked at them with admiration. Their courage and gentle nature impressed him again and again. "You are amazing friends," he said, placing a hand over his heart. One of the women smiled brightly and did the same hand over heart. A simple gesture that meant, "Thank you. We are here for you. We belong here." By evening, they returned home tired but proud. The other women welcomed them with warm food and happy smiles. The fire glowed brightly, and their meal felt like a celebration. Over time, the neighboring ranchers heard about Thomas's new companions. Some were curious, some surprised, but everyone respected the peaceful friendship formed between the ranch and the tribe. Thomas always spoke with pride about the tribe's kindness and wisdom. One day, as the sun set beautifully behind the hills, Thomas heard familiar hoofbeats again. The tribal riders were approaching. This time, the leader himself was among them. Riding strong and healthy, his posture tall and confident, Thomas felt a wave of happiness rush through him. He stepped forward, smiling with true joy. The leader dismounted with dignity. His eyes shined with warmth and pride as he looked at Thomas. The leader placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder, a gesture full of respect and friendship. Then he looked toward the women, who stood proudly behind Thomas. The leader smiled at them too, knowing they had created something beautiful here. He spoke in his language, and though Thomas didn't understand the words, he understood the meaning. "Thank you. You saved me. You honored us. We trust you. We stand with you." The leader presented Thomas with another gift, a finely crafted wooden staff decorated with feathers and carvings that told a story. One carving showed a man helping another. Another carving showed the rising sun, a sign of new beginnings. It was not just a gift. It was a symbol. Thomas accepted the gift with deep gratitude, placing his hand over his heart once more. He wished he had the words to express everything he felt, how much this new friendship meant to him. The leader then spoke to the women, who listened carefully. When he finished, they nodded with great respect. The leader smiled, pleased, and looked back at Thomas. With a gentle bow, the leader and his group rode away, leaving behind peace, connection, and the promise of a lasting bond. Night fell again across the ranch. The stars sparkled like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The air was cool and calm, filled with the soft sound of crickets. Thomas sat on the porch with the 5 women, enjoying the view. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was warm and full of understanding. Thomas looked up at the stars, feeling a deep sense of happiness and thankfulness. He thought about how a single choice, a choice to help a stranger, had changed his entire life. He saved a life and gained 5 new lives in his home. The ranch, once lonely and quiet, now glowed with friendship, care, and purpose. Everything was different now. Thomas understood something very important. Goodness always returns to those who give it. It may come quietly, or arrive in unexpected ways, but it always finds its way back. The women beside him represented more than friendship. They were proof that kindness connects hearts, no matter the language, culture, or distance. Thomas breathed deeply and closed his eyes for a moment. The warmth around him felt like the universe smiling. He knew that tomorrow would bring more work, more laughter, and more learning. He no longer feared the future. He looked forward to it. His ranch, his home, was no longer a place of silence. It was a place of unity, a place of hope, a place where kindness created a new family. Thomas opened his eyes and looked at the women. He smiled, and they smiled back. Their journey together had only just begun. A friendship stronger than fear. A bond deeper than words. A story that would be remembered forever.